This is The Guardian.
Just a warning before we start. This episode contains references to antisemitism and Holocaust denial. Please take care while listening. Regid Ahmed here on Gadigal Land with the full story. This week, social media giants have been fronting up at Australia's Royal Commission on Anti-Semitism and Social Cohesion.
The content that violates should be removed. We report on our enforcement metrics publicly and find that it is removed overwhelmingly.
As the Commission continues to unpick the issues and events surrounding last year's Bondi terror attack, it's now zeroed in on the impact of social media on hate speech and anti-Semitism. And the evidence has been revealing. Today, senior reporter Tori Shepherd, as platforms have their say on accusations they've potentially fueled anti-Semitic content online. It's Wednesday, the 8th of July. Hi, Tori. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Regid.
Tori, just to begin with, how unusual is it for big tech companies to front up and answer questions at an Australian Royal Commission?
It's pretty unusual. I would venture to say it's probably never happened before. I mean, there are two aspects to this. One is that quite often these big tech companies, they don't want to talk to us at all in any scenario, let alone a Royal Commission. And it must be said, we probably won't hear from all of social media platforms. So we've heard from Meta, obviously one of the major social media platforms there with Facebook and Instagram and so on. We will hear from a few others, and there are a few I'm fairly sure we're not going to hear from. Gab, for example, was really quite belligerent in its when it declined to respond to the Royal Commission. There's been lots of criticism of X Corp, formerly known as Twitter. I suspect it's unlikely they will turn up to give any evidence. You never know.
Well, as you say, I mean, that more companies are going to give evidence today. We're talking Tuesday morning. But let's take a look at Meta, some of the evidence we heard yesterday on Monday. Just to begin with, did we get any acknowledgement from Meta to begin with that they think there has been an increase in online hate speech and anti-Semitism on their platforms?
Not particularly. And one of the issues that was discussed was that they don't measure anti-Semitism separately. And they had a reason for that, which is that it cuts across all sorts of things, like it could be bullying, it could be hate, it could be protected characteristic of religion and so on. They argued that actually their level has stayed fairly steady in terms of the prevalence of online hate, and that's after they made some pretty big changes last year. And they said there's been a big drop-off in the action they've had to take, which is the sort of thing you can interpret two ways. Like, are they taking less action or is there less hate? And we didn't really get to the bottom of that.
You just mentioned that the Commission focused on a very particular change. It was centred around a policy shift in January 2025 after the re-election of Donald Trump. Why did the Commission focus on that?
So that was a fairly major change. Mark Zuckerberg announcing it, conceded at the time, look, it'll let a bit more bad stuff through, but that's sort of the price you pay for freedom of speech. So it was kind of philosophically shifting the whole thing more towards allowing freedom of speech rather than blocking anything that could be seen as hate speech. And as part of that, they kind of took the foot off a little bit of their proactive moderating. So actually like getting to things before they've even sort of gone up and been seen by anyone, which they can do with the help of sort of AI and so on. And more to a reactive model, which is where a user will see something that they would say is hate speech or anti-Semitic, and they would report it. We all know that's not always a perfect system. And then it would be taken down, which of course leads to more delays and so on. And they were keen to make the distinction that anything like terrorism or child exploitation would be sort of leapt on immediately, but potentially anti-Semitism would take this more reactive route.
And was the Commission asking questions and making a case that they think that change in policy has led to more problems. I believe they showed some facts and figures back to Meta.
Yeah, look, it got a little fiery. There were certainly specific anecdotes. Like there was one terribly anti-Semitic post that stayed up for, I think it was 4 years after initial complaints. And another more immediate anecdote, which is that witnesses to the Royal Commission have suffered abuse on Facebook after giving their testimony. So, it's kind of a strange little cycle there. They go there to say, this terrible thing happened on Facebook, and then people on Facebook come after them. And then so much of it comes down to sort of apples and oranges in terms of, everybody says there's been this increase in anti-Semitism, but how do you have that conversation when you don't even really have a good definition of anti-Semitism that everybody's using? And if Meta, which has, I think it's 3.5 billion users and hundreds of billions of, content posted, how do you talk to them if they're not separating out anti-Semitism from other forms of online hate? Or some might even say, well, let's tackle hate in general instead of singling out anti-Semitism.
How did Meta defend that decision after Donald Trump came to power to lean towards cutting censorship, as they would put it, over trying to moderate content?
Well, Zuckerberg straight out said that it was a trade-off. Ben Good, the representative who has been giving evidence, he said not only is it a matter of balancing freedom of speech and cutting out hate speech, but he also said they were accidentally censoring things that helped the community. So he gave the example of people might be condemning Hamas or speaking out about hate, and the system would pick that up and censor it. So he was saying, the communities they're trying to help were being hurt by the strict rules.
So basically what you're saying is that they're like, it's harmful. Censorship is also harmful,
exactly,
that kind of thing. We'll come back to Meta's evidence in a moment, because it wasn't just that company we heard from. As you say, other streaming platforms gave an insight into what they describe as a way that people are changing how they talk online to evade detection and moderation.
They're really nimble. People are, you don't want to credit them with, intelligence, but people are pretty speedy and creative at getting around any sort of roadblocks that are put in their way. And there has been several conversations about how people online are using coded language now to hurl anti-Semitic slurs. One of the ones that I hadn't heard about before is that they'll say you can't bake 6 million pizzas or cookies or muffins in a day. And that's a coded it's a Holocaust denial, basically. It's saying 6 million people didn't die at Auschwitz and the other camps, it can't have been that many. And it can be dressed up in we saw one that was a sort of My Little Pony meme and saying you can't cook 6 million muffins. And if I saw that, I would go, that's weird. But if you're tuned into this coded language, then you're in that in-group.
And was that their point, that it's incredibly difficult from their perspective to clamp down on this?
Yeah, incredibly difficult, especially once you think about emojis. So quite often rat emojis and pig emojis are used. There's a whole range of others, but you've got emojis, you've got memes, you've got a huge amount of AI-generated content, and that's not even getting to things like live streaming. Like, how do you even start to keep an eye on those things?
Just staying on the language, Meta talked about how they had taken action, in their view, around the term Zionist, that they had done something about that.
This is really interesting because Zionism is what you'd call a political ideology that is obviously there. There's a Venn diagram there with Judaism. So people were being critical of Zionism and talking about Zionists in sort of conspiratorial terms. And because that was sort of a political accusation, it sort of got through. And Meta, Ben Good, was saying, we realised, though, that the word Zionist there was just standing in as a proxy for Jewish people. And so that's what they meant by that. So then we cracked down on the use of the term Zionist in the context of those sorts of conspiracy theories.
And did the Commission have any response to that in any way?
Look, not immediately. Commissioner Virginia Bell is sitting there kind of sucking it all in. She's got her counsel assisting who asks the questions, and she'll occasionally come in with a question, but I think at the moment she's probably absorbing a huge amount of information. And I've got to say, I have no idea how you absorb all of this and turn it into some kind of workable set of recommendations, but that's her job.
So Meta did acknowledge that they took action that they felt was necessary around the word Zionist, but did they ultimately explain or say why they didn't do more, why they didn't use the algorithmic powers, any technical powers, or increase the standard of the moderation that they apply on their platforms?
So they were arguing that, well, first of all, the scale, again, as I said, is just extraordinary. So they would say only 0.02% of content is hateful or violates their policy, to which counsel assisting made the point that when that's 0.02% of a ridiculous number of billions, that's still quite a lot. They said they've improved since those changes. They've said, the large language models that they're using in AI to detect some of this hate speech, that's improving all the time.
This part of the public hearings in the last week has really come to an attention because of evidence we heard from the eSafety Commissioner, Julie Inman-Grant. She spoke last week. Some of the things she said really made headlines. Why did she accuse X, firstly, of what she described as monetising gore?
What a phrase that was. Horrendous. So she has been in communication continuously with a lot of the social media platforms about the Bondi attack, as well as things before that. But she said in her conversations with X Corp, where she was arguing to get footage of Bondi taken down, the person she was speaking to said something along the lines of, "Oh, well, it's no worse than a gore movie," or that's sort of something you'd watch at home, sort of thing, which you could see on her face was a sort of a shock to her. This is people's families that we're talking about, not a fictional scenario. And that, of course, was part of this bigger picture of it is the shock and the outrage and the horror online that generates the eyeballs, which in turn generate the advertising revenue, which is why she was saying, it's monetising gore.
And has X responded to that at all?
Not that I'm aware of. I think there are ongoing conversations. I feel like a lot of these people are talking behind the scenes all the time and probably negotiating what they do with various bits of content, but I'm not privy to that.
What did she say about the limits she felt she has on her powers in combating online hate, about how much she could do about that?
So she said that there is a very high threshold for her to go and ask for something to be taken down. There are other things like you can age gate things, or I think Twitter now does limited visibility, but let's just go with taking things down because that's probably what you mostly want to see when it comes to hateful content. And I think she said only 2% of the complaints that come to her meet that high threshold for her to ask for it to be taken down. So that's a pretty high limit just there. As she said, also antisemitism isn't explicitly part of her, it's not spelled out, I guess, in her role. But again, hate becomes, under some of that hate legislation. But she did give this interesting example of a horrible scenario that played out with a 14-year-old girl who turned down a boy's advances, after which all his friends came after her with death and rape threats, a horrendous thing. And in that case, she's able to pull it all up, talk to the parents, talk to the school, and work towards a point where they've got an agreement where they apologise and promise not to do it again, and everybody sort of understands it. And that's because that comes under cyberbullying. So a lot of the commission's been about these definitions and what fits where, and what can potentially fall through the cracks if it doesn't neatly slot into one of these categories.
So did she say that she felt like her role as eSafety regulator when it came to anti-Semitism was making any difference at all?
I don't think she went precisely to that point, but to me she seemed frustrated that she was limited in what she could do.
And what about whether social media platforms can do more, can use their technical abilities to clamp down? What's her view? We've
got a long way to go on this. I mean, obviously there are a lot of technical things that you could see people do, but if they're monetising the gore, then you're up against tech bros in Silicon Valley making lots of money. But she did talk about having some kind of, like a code of conduct for hate. Like, let's just get to a place of agreement of what we're talking about. But also the other difficulty is that so many of these companies don't have a real Australian presence. And that was evident in the evidence from Gab, who said, no little Australian agency is going to tell me what to do. I'm a US citizen, sort of thing. So that's yet another barrier. But I mean, I get the impression she's working as hard as she can with all the tools that she's got, but is definitely feeling the limits of them.
We'll be right back. Tori, just more broadly, with this Royal Commission, public hearings have been ongoing for a little while now. There has been some criticism of the Commission's choices about who gives evidence. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, look, there has been quite a bit of criticism about whose voices are being heard at this Royal Commission. In a sense, there's a lot of focus on the antisemitism and a little less thus far on the social cohesion, which you would think would require a great diversity of voices. So there has been criticism that there's been an imbalance there. There was a story in Michael West Media this week as well, talking about how it's more pro-Netanyahu voices. So yeah, look, there has been quite a bit of criticism that it is one-sided.
And how has the Royal Commission responded to that criticism?
They have not responded to that I've seen. I feel it's tricky for them because it's anti-Semitism they're hearing about. But at the same time, as a journalist, it seems they've heard a lot of anecdotes, a lot of lived experience. And now that is absolutely critical. You know, we need to hear how people are actually experiencing anti-Semitism. But it does start to feel as though you're getting witness after witness saying, this terrible thing happened to me. And as a journalist, I'm like, oh, well, who did it? Can we find out? What were their motivations? That's not how this Royal Commission is really operating. So the big unanswered question to me is, we can talk about drivers and we can talk about anti-Semitism spreading on social media, but who is it?
Tori, this still has a long way to run. The final report is still some time away. The focus at the moment is social media, but it's also on traditional media as well. So what should we look out for as public hearings continue?
I think there will be a lot of attention paid to public broadcasters, ABC and SBS, when they turn up. There have apparently been lots of submissions of unfair coverage of conflict in the Middle East. I think you and I know that there are some pretty hectic processes that those broadcasters have to go through to get anything to air. So they will be grilled on how that content gets through. I think that'll be interesting. There'll be more from the social media giants. And then further than that, we will hear about universities and anti-Semitism in the coming weeks. And after that, security and protection of Jewish communities. So as you say, a long way to go.
Tori, we will come back to this as the Royal Commission continues to unfold. But thank you so much for just bringing us up to date, giving us a little snapshot of what's been happening.
Thanks so much.
That was senior reporter Tori Shepherd. You can find our full range of reporting on the Royal Commission as it unfolds on theguardian.com. This episode was produced by Karishma Luthria, sound design and mixing by Daniel Simo, and the executive producer of Full Story is Hannah Parks. Don't forget to subscribe or follow Full Story wherever you listen to podcasts, including on Spotify. I'm Regid Ahmed. See you soon.